How's everybody doing? Y'all know Ben Chavis. Y'all to celebrate with the Wilmington 10 National Publishers Association. And so people are coming in, and Mark Thompson asked if I would kind of talk some to kind of set the stage for the forum this evening. People are coming up from over the stage. How you all doing? Who's here? Who's not from Alabama? All right, who's from Alabama? All right, well, thank you all for allowing us to come, Alabama. I want to welcome you all to this forum that Reid and Mark Thompson will lead. We'll introduce them in a little bit. But I also want to remind us of something. At the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, Dr. King said something that is often passed over because of the tendency to people to be so infatuated with the end, the soaring rhetoric of the end of his speeches, that we miss the meat. And at that Selma, when he was standing on the steps of the state capitol, he said that America has this history, and the history is that every time there is the possibility for poor blacks and poor whites to build political power together in the South, division is sown deliberately. He said it is sown deliberately by what he called the Bourbon class, the aristocracy. He said every time there is even the threat for poor blacks and poor whites to come together and build political power, division is sown. That is insightful if you think about it. When you think about the divisions we're seeing today, when you think about we just walked across the Edmonds Pettus Bridge and we have less voting rights today than what they won 55 years ago. Right now, we sit in this room, we have less voting rights than we had 55 years ago after the Voting Rights Act was passed. Since June 25th, 2013, when the Supreme Court in a 5-4 vote gutted the Voting Rights Act, which has been over 2,441 days, the Congress has refused to fix the Voting Rights Act. Think about that. Strom Thurmond's filibustered the Civil Rights Act of 1957 for one day, and we called him a racist. The Congress that we have has literally refused to restore the Voting Rights Act at a time when courts are coming back again and again saying that we have surgical racism going on with voter suppression, and we have unconstitutionally constituted legislatures in the South who are constituted because of racialized gerrymandering, because you have more progressive people voting in many southern states today than ever before. But their power is being nullified. That's where we are in this moment. And what is worse is that those who use racism to promote the lie of voter fraud, the fraudulent claim of voter fraud, and then they use that in places like Alabama, North Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi to promote racist voter suppression laws targeted at black people and brown people. Once they obtain power using racism, that power is then used in a way to hurt mostly white people. That's a strange irony. Now you say, Reverend Barber, what are you talking about? Well, every state that's a racist voter suppression state is a high poverty state, a low wage state, a denied health care state. Well, in America, 140 million people are poor and low wealth. 66 million of those persons are white. 26 million are black. Now, 61% of African Americans are poor and low wealth, but 66 million white people are poor and low wealth. So the people who use racist voter suppression, racism, to get elected, once they get elected, they then use their power to block health care, In the South, in the 13 former Confederate states, there are more whites without health care. There are more whites without living wage jobs. But race is used to keep divided the very people that ought to be together. And Dr. King said that 55 years ago. He said, in fact, that the only coalition that could fundamentally change this country would be for poor whites and poor blacks to come together and form coalitions, rooted not in personality, but in agenda. He said we needed a revolution of values. We had to deal with racism, poverty, and militarism together. The Poor People's Campaign, we say we must deal with systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. Now, as we begin this presidential forum, let's think about this. We've had 30-some presidential debates since 2016. 140 million people are poor and low wealth in this country. 43% of the nation. 700 people die every day from poverty. We have yet to have had a debate on poverty. Think about that. In the general or in the primary, we've not had one debate televised dealing with the issues that are impacting 43% of the nation. We often find Democrats run from poverty, Republicans racialize poverty, and very true deal with the reality. We'll talk about the middle class, talk about the wealthy. Well, some people even say low wealth, but they won't say poverty, even though poverty is measured twice by the government, both by the poverty rate, which is outdated, and then the supplemental rate for poverty. Jesus talks about poverty. The prophets talked about poverty. What is going on in our political systems and dialogue that we can't deal with an issue that's causing 250,000 people their deaths every year? Now, 7 people die from vaping, and we call it a national emergency. Think about that. 62 million people work every day without a living wage, whether you're in West Virginia or whether you're in Alabama. People living in their cars who go to work every day. Teachers in West Virginia I've met who work without a living wage. People came and marched in Selma today. Some people in Selma can't afford water, or the water's too dirty to drink. In Alabama alone, when we look at Alabama, we know that 45% of the people in Alabama live in poverty and low wealth. 45%. And 53% of children. Notice I didn't say black children or white children, I said children. These are the realities that we're facing, which is why we have to have forums like this to deal with these issues. Lastly, I want to say, as we're preparing to have this forum, that the poor hold the key to political change. Now, there's a reason why in many circles the South is written off. The 13 former conservatives, they say down South, I'm from the South, they say there's a wall in the South and you can't win. Well, you can't win if you don't work. But the reality is, the reason why the South is such prime territory for extremism to keep us apart is because if you add the number of electoral college votes up in the 13 former Confederate states and add maybe one, that's 170 electoral college votes, which means all you have to do is win 13 states and you control 170 electoral votes, 14 states maybe, which means you only need 101 from the other 37 states. You can control 26 members of the United States Senate, which means you only need 25 from the other 37 to hold a majority. You can control 31% of the United States House of Representatives from just the 13 former Confederate states, and you only need 20% from the other 37 states. And you can only control the South if you keep poor blacks and poor whites from working together. Now, we've heard, it's been wrongly reported, that poor and low-income people were the majority of Donald Trump's base. It's not so. People who made $50,000 and below voted against extremism. The numbers are clear. Did you know that in the 13 former Confederate states, there are 75 million adults living in poverty and low wealth. 1/3 of all white people that are poor live in the South. 1/3 of all poor people live in the South. Did you know that the margin of victory in the presidential election in 2016 was only 23.6 million votes, if you add up the votes in all those states. Adult voting age people living in poverty are 3 times greater than the margin of victory in the South. Think about that. What would happen if you could organize poor and low wealth people in the South? In Alabama, for instance, I'll give you a number. In Alabama, there are 1.5 million adults living in poverty and low wealth. The U.S. Senate seat in Alabama was won by only 21,000 votes. That's all. The presidential race was won in Alabama in 2016 by 580,000 votes. 899,000 registered voters in Alabama didn't vote. That's not even including the people who don't register, and many times they represent the 100 million people who don't vote because they never hear their names. They never hear a conversation about poverty. They hear middle class and wealthy. In Georgia, there were 3.4 million adults living in poverty and low wealth. 3.4 million. The margin of victory in the Senate race was only 500,000. There's 6 times more poor and low wealth voting age adults in Georgia than the margin of victory in the Senate race. The margin of victory in the presidential race was only 231,000 votes. Now watch this. 2,772,000 registered voters in Georgia did not vote. And the margin of victory in the presidential race was only 231,000 votes. We are coming to a point where we must not simply talk about what's being done, but what we're not doing. And a large number of that 2.7 million registered voters in Georgia that did not vote are poor and low wealth. And they cannot be motivated if Democrats tend to run from poverty and Republicans tend to racialize poverty, and most folk don't deal with the reality of poverty. Let me give you one other stat. In Texas, there are 8.7 million adults living in poverty and low wealth. And poverty is not somebody living on the street. Poverty is somebody that may look very well, but they're $400 from an emergency. 140 million people live $400 away from disaster. That's poverty. Poverty is people who work every day. 8.7 million adults live in poverty and low wealth. The margin of victory in the Senate race that Tom Cruise won in 2018 was only 200,000 votes. The margin of victory in the race that Donald Trump won in Texas was only 800,000 votes. 6.1 million registered voters in Texas didn't even vote. 6.1 million. And many of them are poor and low wealth who never hear their situations, their conditions talked about by those who run for president. We can have different kinds of debates. I'm not pushing any candidate. What we're saying is you cannot have a true process and a true forum and true debates if we are not at least dealing with poverty as a central issue. Systemic racism and voting as a central issue. Ecological devastation as a central issue. And as long as we run from it and ignore 140 million people, we do not have the ability to do what King told us is the only way out for poor and low wealth people to come together and build political power and vote for an agenda. The reality is, and this might seem somewhat harsh, it is almost a waste of time to march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge just for historical remembrance if we don't use those lessons in our present day. I'd say I don't care how many candidates walk across there and they go over there where John Lewis was beaten, pray for John, and go there where Miss Farrington, where is his aunt was the lady that was beat on the bridge. He works for Poor People's Campaign. His aunt, Elliot's aunt, was beaten on that bridge with John Lewis. John Lewis was holding her. But he told me, There's no need for you to go there where my aunt was beat on the bridge and just say, oh, we honor them, and oh, that was such a great sacrifice, if we do not learn from the lessons. And one of those lessons, we forget that final march from Selma to Montgomery was diverse. It was not all black. It wasn't just black folk. It wasn't just Jimmy Lee Jackson. It was also Viola Lawusa who died, and James Reid, and others. And they were clear, as Dr. King was clear, you will never fundamentally shift this country until you have a coalition of black and brown and white, poor and low wealth people who find a way together and join with their moral leaders and other advocates. And in this season, we must have some candidates that do not listen to their consultants, because consultants tell all of these candidates, don't talk about poverty. They tell them that. They say poor people don't want to be called poor. They haven't even talked to poor people. They just come up with that. Poor people all over this country are saying, we want people to know that we are poor. We're not ashamed of being poor. We're ashamed of a nation that would allow 140 million people to be poor and low wealth and not deal with it. And what I am talking now is not the positions of any candidate. I'm a preacher. I'm talking about the positions in the Bible. Because God said, from a moral perspective, that every nation would be judged by how it treats the poor, how it treats the hungry and the homeless and the immigrant and the sick and those in prison. That's what the Bible says, and we're in the Bible Belt. I love it when extremists talk about these so-called religion nationalists that like to say, the only thing that God is concerned about is being against gay people and being against women's right to choose and being for prayer in the schools and being for guns. I'm like, you just lying. That's not the scriptures. The scriptures say, Isaiah 10, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their right and make women and children their prey. That's what the Bible says. Well, somebody says, but I'm not a Jewish person or a Christian person. I don't believe in the Bible. What, do you believe in the Constitution? The Constitution says that when you put your hand on that Bible or Quran or whatever and swear to uphold the Constitution, you swear to establish justice, not just like that other people fought for it. You swear to establish justice, and there cannot be an establishment of justice when 140 million people live in poverty and low wealth in the richest nation in the world. That Constitution says we are called to provide for the common defense, not just the defense of the lobbyists. We are called to promote the general welfare. Yes, welfare. General welfare, everybody's care, not just making sure the middle class is all right and the wealth is all right. And we are called to ensure domestic tranquility. And you can never have domestic tranquility, domestic peace, when you have an exacerbated reality of income inequality and poor and low wealth people who never even hear their names or their conditions called. And so today, we are here. I see Mark Thompson out of my right peripheral vision. Down south, when we used to hunt bear, you'd have to look out your peripheral vision, because you never could tell who's going to sneak up on you. So have I done what you told me to do, to keep it going till you got here?
I think so.
All right.
Come on.
All right.
Let's give Barber a round of applause.
Stay right here for a minute. Stay right here.
How many of you were on the march today? Would march today? Okay. So you saw it was a little hectic out there. And I just want to take the opportunity to say, hey, Tremaine, I just want to take the opportunity. Come up here, brother. I just want to take the opportunity to say that, we all need to support Selma. Amen. But also in such a way that the infrastructure in Selma is of the type that can support this.
That's right.
Ben, you see Dr. Chavis? Stand up, Ben Chavis. Y'all know who Ben Chavis is? Stand up, Dr. Chavis. Dr. Chavis was executive director of the Million Man March 25 years ago. This is Tremaine Lee with NBC. Tremaine, you at the Million Man March. Hold your hands up. Y'all give Brother Tremaine a round of applause too. And he's doing great work talking to people who otherwise are marginalized, you don't see on TV. What I'm saying is, Million Man March was peaceful and orderly because people supported it. And if more people, from the governor and the mayor and everybody else on down, supported the march, it'd be a lot more orderly. And so I'm saying this publicly. Somebody could have been hurt today. It was only through the grace of God no one was trampled.
That's right.
I'm saying, take an opportunity to say this now. The infrastructure in the state of Alabama and in this city, am I right, Ainka?
That's right.
Am I right?
That's right.
It needs to bring all the resources to bear to provide safety. It's a blessing that the march is so big, isn't it?
That's right.
55 years later. But we don't want anybody to get hurt. So before this can happen again, all the resources, the state troopers, everything, I nominate Chief Dysart. Did he hear me? I nominate Chief Dysart to lead the coordinated authority effort. Let's give Wallace Community College a round of applause. Reverend Barber, let me say this. Did y'all enjoy Reverend Barber? He is continuing the work that Dr. King started. You're not just supposed to mourn somebody, you're supposed to pick up where they left off. Dr. King died in the Poor People's Campaign. So we commend Reverend Barber for all he does. We're thankful to him. June 20th, 2020, the Poor People's Campaign coming back to Washington, D.C. Dr. King gave his life in this struggle. Poverty, there are too many folks who poverty, and too many of us who are in poverty, and too many of us who poor, but we too proud to admit it.
That's right.
Most of us are working poor. How many of you can afford to go 2 months without your paycheck? Raise your hand.
Have mercy.
How many of y'all can afford to go 2 months without your paycheck? Charmaine Fletcher can afford to do that, but others cannot do that. Charmaine, but others cannot do that, right?
Right.
That really means you working poor.
That's right.
How many of y'all have enough saved up to work a whole year without a regular paycheck? Raise your hand. You do. But see what I'm saying? That one person.
Right.
Where's your Hansi? I'm gonna have your Hansi show y'all something a little bit later about money and finances that you need to hear. All right, we're gonna have Joy Reid join us in a moment. Is she almost here? I think so.
Okay, good.
Okay. I want to acknowledge, did we acknowledge Malak yet?
I'm done in there though.
The daughter, stand up.
Yeah, she's gone.
This young lady, go ahead. This young lady was in her, she wasn't born, you weren't born yet. She was in her mother's womb for only 2 months when her father was gunned down. This is the daughter, one of the twins, the twin daughters. Her mother was still pregnant with her. This is the daughter of Dr. Betty Shabazz and Malcolm X, right here. Give her a round of applause. Malcolm came to Selma. Everybody comes to Selma, right? Because that's how important it is. And also we're happy to have here coming to Selma for us, Joy Reid is here. Where's Joy Reid? Is she here? There we go. Ainka, come here for a minute. No, that was the poverty. City? Or county?
City.
This is Inka Sanders. Let's give Hank and Rose Sanders a round of applause. Speaking of parents. And I was asking her a number. I don't know, did Reverend Barber mention this at all? Selma is the 9th poorest city in the nation. But everybody was here today. So that's how valuable it is. All right? And we're thankful Joy is here. We're thankful MSNBC is here. And so, Joy, why don't you introduce our first candidate?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark.
Is our mic on?
Is this on? Oh, there we go. I'm usually pretty loud, so normally I don't need it, but I'm going to go ahead and use it. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Bishop Barber. Whenever I have a speaking engagement, I attempt to imitate Bishop Barber. I don't do a very good job, but I do the best that I can. I want to now introduce our first candidate for this forum, because as Mark said, today was not just about a march. This was about making sure that the presidential candidates touch base with this community and answer questions that are of importance to this community, in addition to just commemorating what happened 55 years ago. So our first candidate, I'm pleased to introduce, who we were just actually marching together, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. You have a big fan base.
Yes.
Here. So,
a lot of people are ready for change.
Yep. Here, let me help you with that. Let's see if it's on.
It's working.
Oh,
it's on. I think you got to do this here. Mine was the same thing. It just happened
I needed
to me.
a pro.
Listen, I just tried it. I tried it out. I just started pushing buttons and it worked. All right. Well, so we were just on this incredible adventure of marching over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was the first time I'd ever done it. Have you ever done it?
Yes.
You have done it before?
I have.
Yeah. It's so profound, and to see Congressman John Lewis at the end of it, it gave me chills. I just want to let you react to what you just experienced.
So it was. Seeing Congressman Lewis there and just being right next to him when he spoke is the reminder of two things at the same moment: how far we've come and how far we need to go. You know, John Lewis is a fighter, and he was a fighter 55 years ago. Non-violent, but a fighter and a believer. When I was here before with him, it was when President Obama was still president, and John Lewis took a group of us from Montgomery down to Selma, and as we drove along, he would point out the places where they'd stopped and camped overnight, the house where someone was willing to give them water because most people weren't, the hospital where they were able to get some treatment after he was beaten. And you know, he was ultimately taken up to Boston because they feared for his life and feared that he would not be safe in a hospital in this area. So as he talked about it, and I still have it on my phone because I recorded it, I asked him if he was ever afraid. And he said, never. Not even when they had the clubs out, when they were beating him, he was never afraid because he knew he was in a righteous fight. And he knew he had the Lord on his side. And it was the fight to be in. So it was great to be there with him today. It was good to be there with Derek Johnson. It was good to be there. There were so many. Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jackson was there today. It was quite a group.
It was pretty incredible. Did you want to throw a question, or should we bounce back and forth?
You know, it was obviously meaningful for all of us. We are in Selma. Yes. But as I'm sure you noticed, there's still some challenges here in Selma. This is the 9th poorest city in the nation. If you were president, what would you do for a city like Selma? So I think of this as we need to start by saying 40 years of trickle-down economics has nearly killed this country. The idea that the way we build an economy is we help the rich and the powerful get richer and more powerful. We've tried that experiment and it hasn't worked. It has hollowed out America's middle class. It has kicked dirt in the faces of the working class, and it has truly crushed the poor and left them with so little. So the way I do this is, you know me, I always start with a plan. I think if you want to get something done, you ought to have a plan. And I start with how to pay for it. So I have a 2-cent wealth tax. I just want to talk just for a sec about what you could do with that. This is a 2-cent tax nationwide on the top 0.1%, folks who have more than $50 million in assets. Your first $50 million, free and clear, but your 50 millionth and first dollar, you got to pitch in 2 cents. What could we do with 2 cents?
And the answer is we could do universal child care and early childhood education for every single baby in this country. Think what that would mean right here in Selma. That's federal money that doesn't go to the state. It goes straight down into the local community. The local community center that wants to offer child care, the local church that wants to offer it, someone who wants to offer it out of their home, as long as they're meeting the local standards on safety and so on, that money comes in. Universal pre-K for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old in America. And we could stop exploiting the people who do this work, largely African American women and Latinas, and raising the wages of every child care worker and preschool teacher in America. 2 cents, but more. That same 2 cents would let us put an historic investment in our public schools. $800 billion into our public schools. Again, skip the state and take it right down to the local level. Quadruple funding for Title I schools. Think what that would mean for a community like Selma. It would mean that communities that are poor don't just have to have poor school districts and poor services. It's putting that federal money in. And I was a special education teacher, so part of this plan says for the first time ever in history, we would fully fund IDEA so that children with disabilities would get the full educational opportunities that they deserve. We do all of that. And for children post-high school, recognize today, 21st century people need more education. So we could do tuition-free, 2-year college, 4-year college. We could do technical school. We can increase the Pell Grants, and we can truly level the playing field. I've got $50 billion to put directly into our historically black colleges and universities. And just one more thing you can do with 2 cents, you can do all of those things. And we can cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. If I can, Mark, I just want to say a word about particularly student loan debt. You know, I love to dig in and figure out how all the numbers work. The way I've set up my student loan debt plan, you have to remember, African Americans borrow more money to go to college, borrow more money while they're in college, and have a harder time paying it back when they get out of college. We do, the 43 million Americans get their student loan debt canceled. For people with student loan debt, that would help close the black-white wealth gap by about 20 points. That would be historic. We've never done anything like that.
So to stay a little bit on this theme, I was struck by, I don't even know if you had announced yet, you went down to Mississippi into the Delta, and you talked, you know, because the Democratic Party has gotten very infatuated with talking about the middle class, which is important. But there are something like 42 million low wealth and poor people.
That's
in the
right.
country.
Reverend Barber is here to remind us.
I'm looking for Bishop Barber. I always
Thank
look
you.
to make sure that. How many?
140 million when you use the supplemental housing.
So if you're talking about, thank you, Bishop Barber. So poverty doesn't get talked about a lot because you know, poor people don't vote. You know, and one of the things that I find even in sort of my world, the pundit world, is poor white people don't vote. That's not who elected the current president because they don't vote.
That's right.
The poverty rate in this state is 16.9%, which is about 3.5% over the national average. What would you say? How do you get somebody who feels the system never helps them? No one ever talks to them. Democrats never come to the South. They just skip the whole region except Florida. And they say, you know what, voting doesn't help me. How would you convince them? Because you do have a lot of plans, a lot of ideas, but how do you convince somebody that feels completely left out by the system that voting will help them and change their lives?
I think you ask exactly the right question. And I think the answer in part is you just got to show up. That's why I was in the Mississippi Delta, and you got to show up with something specific. Not how I just want to help you all generally, but I showed up to talk about my housing plan. Look, we've got a housing crisis in America. after decades of no new federal investment in housing and developers moving from the 2-bedroom, 1-bath house I grew up in, garage converted to hold my 3 brothers, that house isn't being built anymore. Developers are now building mansions, and I'm not mad at them, that's where the profits are. But the consequence is our housing stock is shrinking and our population is growing. So people pay more for less, more people are homeless, more people are doubling up 2 and 3 and 4 generations in deteriorating housing. So when I put together a plan to put in a lot of money to build about 3.2 million new housing units, the first place I went to talk about housing was to the Mississippi Delta, and to walk it and to hear from people, so that it's about the importance of housing, but not housing designed in Washington. It's about the importance of, if you had a good federal partner, what would it look like on your block? So you go to some towns, and what they need is they need housing for seniors. They need housing for people with disabilities. Housing that's been adapted, but sometimes it's group housing that they need. Other places you go, there's a house that's fallen down, there's a house that's burned down. Then there's another house, and they're trying to hang on to a neighborhood, but pieces are gone. They need infill. They need some federal help to be able to come back. So the way I see this is the federal government should not be there to say this is the kind of housing you must do, but we'll set aside about $500 billion to say you design what you need, and it will be housing for you. We'll be the partner that helps fund it, and this gives us a chance to build housing for middle-class families, you bet, and for working-class families, and for the working poor, but also for the poor, and for people with disabilities, and for seniors who want to age in place, and for people who've been incarcerated and are trying to make it back, for people who've been living on the streets and under bridges and need a place to live. We've had a lot of talk about health care, and I'm all in. I'm for Medicare for all. I believe we need universal health care because I believe it is a matter of urgency. It's a matter of morality, but so is housing. Safe, affordable housing is critical. And can I just add one part on this? I do big plans. I like big plans because we got big problems. And when you got big problems, you got to have big plans to meet them. But you also have to back up when you look at those plans and ask the question about how people are treated differently if they're black or if they're white. And for me, on housing, this is just one of these. I've got a big housing plan for everybody, but my housing plan also says one of our serious problems in America is the consequence of decades and decades of redlining that subsidized housing for white people and helped them build wealth generation after generation, and discriminated against housing for black people. So I have an overall housing plan, but I also have a housing plan that specifically targets redlining and people who live in formerly redlined areas to make sure that they've got a chance to buy homes and build the kind of wealth that they were denied the opportunity to do for decades.
Yeah.
So.
Give a round of applause. You all feel free. That's fine. Again, I think I speak on behalf of everyone here that you took the time to come here to this little town and made a big difference in the world. We also, don't we all appreciate that? But 55 years since the Voting Rights Act, we're still dealing with voter suppression.
Yes, we are.
And we have evidence that that's already taking place in advance of November. And we don't necessarily have the plans to combat it going forward. What are your thoughts about voter suppression, and what do we do about it?
So voter suppression undermines our whole democracy. And I just got to tell you, every now and again, we just need to be shocked. I want people to be shocked by the fact that one of the 2 major political parties in this country plans to win, and they're pretty open about it, by keeping African Americans from voting, by keeping Latinos from voting, by keeping poor people from voting. They want to keep them from voting, and that's how they plan to hang on to power. Well, I say we get out there and we defend the very basis of our Constitution, which is that every citizen votes. So I'll tell you how I'd like to start this. I'd like to start this. We need to get out there and start arguing for a constitutional amendment to protect the right of every American citizen to vote and to get that vote counted. Put some federal muscle behind this. And a federal law. We could pass a federal law to roll back every racist voter suppression law in this country. One more. We could pass a federal law, and I will fight for this, to roll back all political gerrymandering in this country. Voting is a big part of the heart and soul of what we do. I hope you will all go to ElizabethWarren.com and just take a look, because I've got a whole democracy agenda on this, where we put real money into things like state-of-the-art voting machines, for goodness sakes, and a uniform federal ballot, and a national holiday when it's time to vote, so people can take the day off and go vote.
I have to ask you this question, because so I've been in probably 5 states in the last 3 months.
I've been in that about the last 3 days.
I think you probably the last 3 days. I think you probably have selfies from 5 states from today. Just from today. But a lot of people that I talk with, and this is particularly black women, they say, I like Elizabeth Warren.
That's good. That's a good start.
They like that. So that's one. But then they say, I'm worried because she talks very openly about taxing the super rich. And that class of Americans controls states. They control the government. They will do anything to stop her. What do you say back to somebody who says, I like Elizabeth Warren, but I'm afraid that she'll be inundated by the powers that be. The moneyed class will not let her win.
So I see this as there's a whole lot more of us than there is of them. You know, if we just get out there and fight for it, as long as we hold back, as long as we're timid, that's how they have power. You know, it's no surprise, Joyanne, the number one thing I want to do first, people say, what do you want to get done first? I want to attack the corruption in Washington. I want to attack the influence of money. I want to attack the notion that, think of it this way, I get it. Billionaires are going to have more shoes than you and I have. They're going to have more cars. They're even going to have more houses. But they don't get a bigger share of our democracy. And I got plans to reduce the effect of their voices in Washington. But how do we get there? We get there by getting out and voting. And that's why being here in Selma, kind of the heart and soul of the Voting Rights Act, of the reminder to every American citizen how many people bled and died in order to get that vote to you, and the importance of your getting out there and voting. I tell you, everybody votes, we'll win.
We win.
That's right.
One last question for the senator, and we appreciate again the time you're taking here. There's a lot of punditry.
Oh, there is.
And people try to predict what you're going to do, what you should do, and they tend to be male pundits.
You notice that?
Yeah, I've noticed that. So
they got lots of advice.
They have a lot of advice, unsolicited advice. So why don't you share with, and mind you folks, this is also the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote, 19. Are you listening to any of these pundits, or are you nevertheless going to persist?
I persist.
Okay.
You know, but I will say one thing about it, because this is for me. Look, I didn't look at myself in the mirror at 14 and say, "You make a good president." I looked at myself in the mirror at 7 and said, "You'd make a good public school teacher." And that's what I wanted to be. And I thought I'd spend my whole life as a teacher. I was a special education teacher, and then I became a college professor. But all of my life has been about what's happening to hardworking families across this country? What's happening to people who just get out there and bust their tails every day and fall further and further behind? And I got into this fight because I discovered in America where our country, our government, has been captured by those at the top, and they just keep making it little at a time work better and better for themselves. So I'm in this fight to try to turn that around. And the joy, and it truly is the joy of being in this fight, is back when I was a college professor, I'd talk about this and 6 or 8 people would hear about it. And today I'm running for president, and I get a chance to get out there and fight, not just for these ideas, but also how I fight for them. I don't spend my time, 70% of my time, with millionaires and billionaires and corporate lobbyists raising money. I spend all of it doing grassroots financing. And I do it with volunteers, with people who pitch in $5. And if that looks like the right way to run a campaign to you, I hope everybody here will go to ElizabethWarren.com and sign up an hour to talk to people to get them to vote, or pitch in $5, but get in the fight. 2020, this is our time in history, and it will not come our way again. We've got to be in this fight.
Elizabeth Warren.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Give Elizabeth Warren a big round of applause for coming to Selma. Selma matters.
Okay.
All right. How y'all feel? We've been joined by the president of NAACP, Derrick Johnson. Give him a round of applause. Okay. Where's Johanse, who grew up in Massachusetts?
There he is.
There's a Massachusetts, and introduce her to Malak because Malcolm X lived in Boston, didn't he?
Yeah.
Roxbury. That's y'all senator. Okay. How y'all feel? You feel like you're a part of history? How many of y'all glad to see Joy and Reid too? Makes you feel special to see Joanne, doesn't it? So I think we've got one more candidate joining us. I think she's close. And folks, we're streaming this courtesy of MSNBC.com. Okay, so you can see it right there. It's also on Facebook at Make It Plain. How was that experience for you today, Joy?
Oh, this was incredible today. I mean, I've covered the march. I covered the 2015 march.
Right.
But I've never actually walked over the bridge and had that experience. And just to do it in the year when John Lewis is there at the end, you just get goosebumps thinking about it. Just the people walking around me. The fact that these presidential candidates came out here, and I love the fact that it was done before Super Tuesday.
Right.
So that it can focus people's attention on the fact that it's not just about commemorating the Voting Rights Act, it's about allowing the people to use the Voting Rights Act right now in real time to choose their own elected officials, their own elected leaders. So
That's right.
God bless Selma.
And let's be clear that if there were no Selma,
That's right.
then a lot of these people would never even be in elected office.
There'd have been no Obama.
There'd been no Obama. There probably wouldn't have been even a liberal peanut farmer from Georgia, or the son of a single mother from Hope, Arkansas, a black president. You wouldn't have all these women candidates running.
Right.
And we have an embarrassment of riches because we have, on this 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, we have 2 women still in the race for president.
Three.
2, how many?
Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh, Tulsi, I'm sorry. Tulsi's still in the race too. That's
3.
right, forgive me.
I said 2 earlier on TV, so I had to make sure we corrected. 3.
So 2/3 of the women candidates care that much about Selma.
Right.
So here's the other one. Please welcome Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Well, hello, everyone. Great to see you.
So, Senator, I want to start by asking you the same question that I asked Senator Warren, because we were all lined up in the front of that march, and you guys came out, and I saw the two of you lining up because they were lining the women up in the front, which I thought was really important to do, to let women lead,
Yes.
as they should. Can you just give us your impressions of what it was like to be a part of that, a part of this year, with John Lewis being?
Well, I think, first of all, and I had been there before with Congressman Lewis, and to see him come back, a little gaunter, but his voice just as strong, was the most memorable moment to me of this march. And he stood up on these steps surrounded by people and basically says, the torch will always be passed on. And the time when I had been here with him a few years ago was the weekend that the Montgomery police chief, 48 years later, not the same chief, but a Montgomery police chief, took off his badge and handed it to Congressman Lewis and apologized on behalf of that police department for not protecting them 48 years before. And when I saw that, and I wasn't actually in the room, but that weekend we were all talking about that. You think that is a long time for an apology, but Congressman Lewis waited and he got it. And he's been leading like that from the beginning. The other thing that was special about this march was that we had our commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment and the women's right to vote, and the memory of so many women civil rights leaders as well, because women were beat up and shoved and left unconscious on that bridge as well. And so that was really good to talk about that.
Absolutely. Mark.
I'm sure you noticed that you're cognizant of one of the challenges Selma faces. Is one of the poorest counties in the country. The white poverty rate in Dallas County is 15%. It is 17% for Latino residents, and 39.1% of African Americans in Dallas County, which is Selma, live in poverty. What would you do for a city, an historic city like Selma, that is under these conditions?
Well, I think the first thing is that we need a new president. We know that. Secondly, we need to win big, which to me means getting some help and friends to the African American community, specifically African American women that have been really shouldering support for the Democratic Party for a long, long time. And this time, kind of like in 2018 when we won a bunch of those House races and put Nancy Pelosi in as Speaker of the House, this time we're going to have to build a big, big coalition. And when we do that, we can then get the bills through Congress and send Mitch McConnell packing. The specific, because I'm just being about how we get this done in a big way, the best way would be to take back the US Senate in addition to the presidency. Okay, so what do we need to do once we get there? Well, the first, Congressman Clyburn has a bill to invest, and Corey is carrying it in the Senate, and that is to invest in perpetually impoverished communities, to make sure that 10% of federal funds go to counties where 20% of the people have been, at least 20%, as you know, some are more, have been poor for 30 years. 10, 20, 30. And he's actually gotten some of this passed for ag money, but it's the idea to broaden it out for other kinds of federal funding. Secondly, I'm sure you were just speaking to my friend Elizabeth, all of these investments we need to make in terms of childcare and education. And there is a way to do it, because those tax cuts that the Republican just passed, a lot of that money went to the top. In fact, the president went down to Mar-a-Lago after he signed it, and he literally said to a fancy ballroom of his friends, "You just got a lot richer." Yeah. Were any of you in the room? Yeah, I didn't think so, no. Well, I didn't want to embarrass anyone, you know, if you were. But of course you weren't. And that's because that money went to wealthy people. So taking that money back and putting it into things like universal child care and putting it into things like communities that need the help, I think will make all the difference. And then the last thing I hope we talk about is just voting rights and making sure that everyone can vote and making those changes. But I don't think our economy can function well if people aren't part of it, if people don't have a good enough education through our public schools. My mom taught second grade until she was 70 years old, and I went to public schools, and so did our daughter. And so I feel pretty strongly about it. And our daughter was in a school that was 90% free and reduced lunch for a number of years in the Twin Cities. And I got to see what happened when people didn't have anything, and kids getting their dinner out of vending machines, and what would happen in the school. And I am so committed to higher pay for teachers, better infrastructure for our schools, and better schools in areas that don't have as much money.
So, Senator, you've made a strong pitch that you are a candidate that can turn, the sort of Midwest voter around. But of course, the base of the party is African-American voters. Thinking about a state like this, you mentioned the Senate. There is a Senate race here. There's a Senate race in Alabama.
Really?
A re-elect for Doug Jones.
The most amazing senator.
Yeah.
Who I adore, who took such a brave vote on the impeachment hearing that he should be commended for.
So what that says to me is, despite the fact that Democrats often do skip the South, obviously southern states are winnable. Doug Jones won.
And the new governor of Kentucky, Mitch McConnell, now has a Democratic governor.
So what would be your pitch? The margin of victory that got Doug Jones in was he got about a third of white voters and about 2/3 of African-American voters were 2/3 of what he needed, what he had, what he got to get him in. So what pitch would you make to black voters in this state so that they would not split ticket and think, you know what, I'm going to vote, I want you and I want Doug Jones. But what would be your pitch to those voters?
Well, for me, one of my pitches would be we got to re-elect Doug Jones. But the second thing would be that I believe in economic opportunity. And my whole life has been about that. I didn't come from money. And if it wasn't for unions, my grandpa would have never made it through working in the mines. And my parents didn't have a lot of money. And I fought for everything that I got, and I worked really hard. And I think the world isn't fair for a lot of people. And so what's motivated me a lot in my work in public service is trying to help people and pull them up. And I don't think that the world is fair right now. So what I would say is, one, the economic plan that I laid out, and there's a lot more detail on it. Secondly, voting rights. I've been the leader in the U.S. Senate on voting bills, getting rid of voting purges, that's a bill I have with Sherrod Brown, getting rid of gerrymandering, automatically registering every kid to vote when they turn 18 in the entire nation. And as president, I think I can get it done. Voting purging was described to me best by our friend Stacey Abrams, which if they had better laws in Georgia, she would be the governor right now. And what she said, I think, is my view of this thing. She said, if you don't go to church or mosque or synagogue for a few years, you do not lose your right to worship. And if you don't go to a meeting like this, you guys are such good meeting goers, but if you don't go to a meeting like this for a few years, you do not lose your right to assemble under the Constitution. And if you haven't voted in a few elections, you should not turn up at the voting booth and find out that your name has been purged from a list and you've lost your right to vote. And that's exactly what's going on with those. And then the last thing I would mention is criminal justice reform. And I was one of the co-sponsors of the First Step Act. I'm someone that has some experience working in the criminal justice system, and I think that helps me to be a better president, to know what we have to do to make the system much more fair. And we can maybe talk about that later, but those are things that I would strongly put out there for the reason to vote for me for president.
Give a round of applause. I know, once again, You know, I speak on behalf of everyone here that you took the time to care about Selma. And I know time is precious. You got other places to be. So we'll ask one more question. Kind of the same question I asked Senator Warren. A lot of punditry is giving you advice about what you should do and setting certain bars. We want to know what you're thinking, what your plans are. And secondarily, I asked Senator Warren this question several months ago. I just never got a chance to ask of you. If you were to become the nominee, would you consider a woman as a running mate? Would you support a ticket with 2 women in America at the Senate?
I mean, the way I looked at this, we have had 2 men as running mates for a really long time, so why couldn't we have 2 women? And then when I'm asked if a woman is tough enough to beat Donald Trump, I always say to them, Nancy Pelosi does it every single day. Of course I would consider a woman, and Elizabeth and I, it's interesting to me because if you've watched the debates between the 2 of us, we've like won the last few debates. One time, another the other time, by pundits, I thought. And so I wish that we were winning right now. But the point is that we are in the top 5. The top 5 for vote getters, top 5 for delegates, and the field used to be a lot bigger. And I very much miss some of my friends, as I'm sure you do, that were in the field. Kamala and I would always cuddle in between the breaks on the debates and complain about how cold it was and various other things. And so in any case, we are where we are. And tomorrow, or on Super Tuesday, Alabama's going to have a major role, right, as a Super Tuesday state. And I want you to remember that only 3% of the voters have voted so far. And if those 4 states, 2 were caucuses. And caucuses are a little harder for regular people to go and vote. And so that's why when I look at this, I think this Super Tuesday is really important. It includes big states, it includes medium states like mine. Minnesota is one of the states, and right now it's just really between Senator Sanders and me in my state. We are the top 2 in the state, and I'm leading them right now, but that's going to be an interesting race because it's different than the other states. And then you've got another number of southern states that are up, including North Carolina and Tennessee and Arkansas and this state. So I think that's going to make it really interesting as well.
All right.
Okay.
Amy
Thank you very
Klobuchar,
much,
give her a
Senator
round of
Klobuchar.
applause. You want to give out your website? Hold it. You want to give out your website? You want to give out your website? You don't need any more. You don't need any more money. She got enough money. Guess she don't need no money.
AmyKlobuchar.com, Reverend Mark.
Wonderful. So good.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Amy Klobuchar, give her a round of applause. I think they want you to go. No, right. And give her a big round because she was in that crushed crowd today. She got crushed a lot, so y'all give her some love. Before we go, we're in Selma. We want to close appropriately. Did I see the SNCC Freedom Singers come in? Is Charles here? Charles, come on up here. Where any other Freedom Singers here? Come on, Charles. Anybody else with you? We can work with you, Carl. That's good enough. And let's hear some closing remarks and some final instruction from our very special guest, Joy Reid. Give her another round of applause. Let's hear what she has to say. She's going to give us our charge for Tuesday and tell us why voting is important.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for having me here today. We're going to let this elder come up these elders come up. Do you want to talk to them first?
No. You go.
Okay. Well, what I would say is this was my first time actually walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was a stirring experience for me. It was historic. But I think the important thing about history is that it's useless if you don't use it. Thank you. And the history that this city made, that Selma, Alabama made, is the history that allowed everything else, whether it's President Obama, whether it's having the ability of women to be elected in record numbers in 2018. If we don't use our vote, then we lose our voice. We become voiceless. And so what I would urge and beg this community to do would be to look around your community and ask yourself, what's the one thing that you could do to make it better? The one thing you could do to make it better is send people to your city council, to your mayor's office, to your governor's office, and to the presidency who will actually change your life. You can't do everything, but you can do one thing. Voting it's the minimum of citizenship, but it's also an honor. You know, there are a lot of people whose families have come to this country from places where they're not allowed to vote, where they're not allowed to have a voice. But you have a voice. And this city gave this nation its conscience.
That's right.
Gave this nation its conscience in 1965. I was conscious of standing in the place where blood was shed for me to be able to vote. So I just beg you and I urge you, please don't throw that right away, because if it wasn't valuable, people wouldn't be trying to steal it. So thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Joy. Everyone hold their positions. You know, blood was shed here, and one of the people responsible for organizing Selma, who just walked in the room, Dr. King sent him here as a very, very young man with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He organized the SCLC, got the SNCC family together. He is here with us today. He was inducted into the Ministers Hall of Fame in the Voting Rights Museum on yesterday. Support that museum. We have to support the history of this community. You know, other communities are growing economically, but the one that paved the way for all of us isn't. So we got to concentrate and spend money in Selma, right, Bishop? Bishop Franklin, 48. Bernard Lafayette, stand up. Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King's lieutenant here in Selma. Bernard, we need you to come up here and join the Freedom Singers. We need to close out because everybody's not here. Come on up here. Bernard was a freedom singer too. Come on up here, Bernard. Come this way. Come on up here. We're going to give Bernard a minute to come up here. We're so grateful to MSNBC.com and Joy Reid. It's a big deal. It's a big deal for a major network to come to little old Selma. Amen? We're right about that? So, hurry. Yeah, we know year 50 was big too. Come on now. Bernard's coming up here. So we're going to have the SNCC Freedom Singers close us out in the spirit of Selma and the spirit of the movement. Bernard got a voice too. He can sing as well. He didn't just organize, he was a singer. Come on.
Only fill in, you know.
Charles Neblett is going to lead us. Come on, Charles, take it.
Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Everybody sing. Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Everybody sing. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Oh, tell me how you stand it. Oh, tell me how you can. Will you be an Uncle Tom, or will you be a man? Everybody sing. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Everybody sing. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? My daddy was a freedom fighter, and I'm his freedom son. I'll stick to the freedom fight until every battle is won. Everybody sing. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Everybody. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? They say in Dory County, no neutrals have we met. You either be a freedom fighter Let all you tombourons barn, let everybody sing. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
Everybody,
Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Everybody sing. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
One more thing. How many original foot soldiers are here? I see Charles Malden. Charles, those who were on the bridge. There we go. These are the people who were on the bridge on Bloody Sunday. We commend them. Please give the original organizer who started this Jubilee almost 30 years ago, the only annual commemoration of any civil rights action in history. Every year people gather in Selma. Fire Rose Sanders to Reid. Give her a round of applause.
Fire Rose.
And one more to close us out. This little light of mine, can we do that? Let's go.
This little light of mine,
Well,
I'm gonna let it shine.
Well,
This little light of mine, yeah, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it